Welcome back. Today we get to talk about one of my favorite topics. We will talk about a spectrum of sugar metabolism disorders that range on one end from pre-diabetes to full-blown diabetes. Now, I'm not going to talk about the kind of diabetes that happens early in life. That is the type of diabetes when the pancreas fails for some reason and stops making insulin. This is when we see young people requiring insulin injections. I'm going to be talking about the kind of diabetes that results from lifestyle, what kind of food we eat, how physically active we are, and how we respond to stress and tension. In short, how we live our lives. So why is diabetes so important? We've already heard about the importance of high cholesterol and high blood pressure. Well, diabetes is one of the key risk factors for kidney disease, leading to dialysis, heart disease, and stroke. In fact, if I see a woman coming into my office after having a heart attack, the first question I think about is she smoking cigarettes or is she diabetic? That's how big a risk factor it is. Diabetes affects every single organ in our body. We need to think of the diagnosis of diabetes as the end result of a much longer continuum. The continuum starts with something called insulin resistance, and then metabolic syndrome, before manifesting the disease that we label as diabetes. This is important because, in other words, even before the blood tests tell us that you have diabetes, we have signs that can be seen much earlier. So let's look at this spectrum and review a few of these definitions. One of the first signs that we are at risk for developing diabetes is the presence of insulin resistance. Insulin is a hormone which controls blood sugar. Insulin is produced by the pancreas. Stimuli like insulin and even exercise carry blood sugar into our cell. So we need the insulin to move the sugar into our cells where we can use it for energy. Insulin resistance occurs when the transport of sugar into the cell is no longer working properly. The pancreas has to keep working harder and harder to produce more insulin. High insulin levels on a blood test will tell us if you have insulin resistance. Eventually, the pancreas can't keep up. It gets exhausted and can't produce enough insulin. That's when people develop insulin-requiring diabetes. And those people need insulin injections. But the story does not stop there. Insulin resistance is part of a larger syndrome called metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome has 4 components. Number 1 is insulin resistance. Number 2 is high blood pressure. Number 3 is abnormalities in the cholesterol panel. That means the HDL, or good cholesterol, could be low, and the triglycerides are high. Remember the seesaw. Triglycerides are up, HDL is down. These are the first 3 components of the metabolic syndrome. The 4th component of metabolic syndrome is really what's driving the train toward diabetes, and that is abdominal obesity, wearing your weight in the midline. Yes, that's right. extra weight in the midline will cause diabetes and a lot of other problems as well. Extra midline weight is linked to heart disease, believe it or not, to osteoporosis, even Alzheimer's disease, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, and these are just a few. The Center for Disease Control tells us that obesity is a major public health threat. Nearly 27% of adults in the United States are now obese. That's 72 million Americans. The healthcare implications of obesity are enormous. By the end of the decade, it is predicted that the annual cost for diabetes and prediabetes alone will be $500 billion. So let's say you have that diagnosis of diabetes, or you have metabolic syndrome, or you have already evidence of insulin resistance. You have high insulin levels in your blood, and you go to your physician. Well, your physician is going to name that disease. Remember, we discussed this in the first couple of lectures. Your physician is going to name the disease and is going to prescribe a medication. The ill to the pill. This is the classic way metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and insulin resistance are handled. Now think about this for a few seconds. I already said that metabolic syndrome has high blood pressure associated with it, cholesterol abnormalities, blood sugar abnormalities, central obesity. Guess how many pills you're going to get? You're going to get a pill for insulin resistance. You're going to get a pill for high blood pressure. You're going to get a pill for cholesterol. And your physician is going to say, you need to take an aspirin too, because rightfully so, you are at an increased risk for heart disease. But now you've been listening to this course. And because you are listening to the Science of Natural Healing, you now know, even if you take those medications, you have to ask the question, what's going on in my soil? We're at an increased risk for heart disease. But now you've been listening to this course. And because you are listening to the Science of Natural Healing, you now know, even if you take those medications, you have to ask the question, what's going on in my soil? What's happening to make me sick that leads to all of these diagnoses? Why is the fruit on my tree sick? Well, I have a great patient named Juan. He came to me after having bypass surgery, and he'll be thrilled to know that I'm talking about him in this course. Diabetes was his biggest risk factor for heart disease. Ron was 168 pounds overweight. By the time he came to me, he said, I need to get off the tracks. I want to get to the underlying cause of my problems. I want to get this diabetes fixed. In essence, what Ron was saying is, help me to strengthen my soil. So I told Ron there are 5 key steps that he needs to take to strengthen his soil. And at the time he came to see me, he was ready to hear them. I told him that we need to look at, number 1, what he's eating, proper nutrition. Number 2, is he exercising every day? What is his physical activity? Number 3, is he a hothead? How does he respond to stress and tension? Number 4, is he sleeping well at night? And number 5, I told Ron that even environmental toxins can make his diabetes worse. Let's take number 4, for example. Most people don't realize lack of sleep can lead to insulin resistance. Lack of sleep is a stress on the body. And as you will hear in later lectures, stress raises blood sugar and makes insulin resistance worse. Well, Ron had something we see in people that are very overweight. He had something called sleep apnea. This is when you go to sleep at night and you snore and you stop breathing. This was a result of being obese. Research shows that people who tend to clock an average of 5 hours or less of sleep each night have a higher risk of developing diabetes. As for stress and environmental toxins, these areas are so important that they will be covered in separate lectures. But for Ron, the best place to start was with nutrition and exercise. So let's look at some of these areas, and let's make some literally life-saving recommendations for Ron. Let's start with my favorite topic, nutrition. Because remember, food is medicine. Now, sugar and carbohydrates are digested at different rates. The rate of digestion is called the glycemic index. The higher the index, the faster the body converts that food to sugar. Let me give you an example. A spoonful of white sugar has a glycemic index of 100. That's the highest number a food can have. The minute you eat that white sugar, it goes right into your bloodstream within seconds. Another way of measuring the conversion of food to sugar is called the glycemic load. Now, this is a little bit more complicated because the glycemic load is an even more accurate assessment of the impact of food on blood sugar and ultimately on insulin levels. A food with a glycemic load of greater than 20 is high. A food with a glycemic load of less than 10 is low. For me, when it comes to glycemic index and glycemic load, the lowest possible foods are the best for everyone, but especially for someone who's overweight or pre-diabetic or has diabetes. So let's look at the difference. Let's take a carrot, perfect example. The glycemic index of a carrot is 16, but the glycemic load is 2. So carrots are okay. Why is the glycemic load less than the glycemic index? Because in this case, carrots are very high in fiber. When we eat a food that's high in fiber, and you've heard this before, it slows down the absorption of sugar. Fiber, as you already know, will also lower blood sugar. So that makes carrot a good choice with a low glycemic load. So how do I want Ron to eat? And ultimately, how do I eat? And how do I want you to eat? The most important thing I can teach you about food as it relates to inflammation in health is that I don't want you to eat foods that spike up your insulin level. Insulin has been linked to cancers. It leads, as we have discussed, to inflammation. And every time we spike up our insulin, we are making ourselves sick. Foods that have a low glycemic index and a low glycemic load are the foods that I want Ron and I want you to eat. Now, we already discussed many of these foods. And I know you're going to say, I know, but I'll say it again. Soluble fiber, lowest cholesterol, lowest blood sugar. Oats and bran, beans and lentils. Let's get our green leafy vegetables on board. Green leafy vegetables have a very, very low glycemic load and low glycemic index. Cruciferous vegetables, like cauliflower, broccoli, and cabbage, these are all good choices. Omega-3 fish, remember we have salmon, we have mackerel, we have anchovy, we have sardines, and we have herring. You remember the word smash. And omega-3 eggs. And if you're going to eat meat, lean meat, like free-range chicken and turkey, these will not spike up your insulin. I told Ron I wanted him to pick his fruits from a low glycemic index list. What does that mean? I literally handed him a handout that said, eat this and don't eat that. I told him he can eat 3 whole fruits a day, but they had to be low sugar fruits: apples, berries, peaches, pears, plums. He can have an orange, but not orange juice, right? He can have a grapefruit. These are all low in sugar. One thing I had to tell him that he was eating a lot of was dates and raisins. And I said, Ron, dates and raisins are too high in sugar. What about for snacks, he said. I recommended some walnuts, some almonds. And remember, the magic number, around 15. Ron has 168 pounds to decrease. So I don't want him having too many calories from nuts. I also suggested celery sticks, baby carrots, and I even told Ron to take an apple or take a pear and put it in a pot with some water and soften it up, make a warm apple. And if he wants, I told him to put cinnamon on it, because cinnamon has been shown to lower blood sugar. He was very concerned with what he can eat in the morning. What kind of breakfast cereal could he have? He was already eating granola, and I had to point out that granola is incredibly high on the glycemic index, so we needed a substitute. I had him pick a high fiber cereal. And on some mornings, I asked him to make a protein smoothie and maybe to make an egg white omelet, and also to use steel-cut oats. So he had lots of choices. The hard part for Ron is I had to tell him to stop certain foods. And I don't like to focus on what we can't eat, because years ago, my patients used to call me Dr. No. When I was a young physician, I used to say, no, don't eat that, no, don't eat this. And I realized that's not the way to do it. Foods like cookies, cakes, candy, and ice cream, I had to tell Ron, we have to start substituting our baked apple and baked pear. I had to remind him about the liquid calories. And I will say no soda, no fruit juice, and small to none on the alcohol. Alcohol is calories, and it's sugar, and it wouldn't serve him well in this situation. I also had to tell Ron to resist the white stuff. If it's white, whether it's a bagel, bread, even whole wheat, rice cakes, potatoes, I had to tell him we need to find substitutes for all these foods. Now, one area that was confusing Ron, that confuses a lot of my patients, is in label reading. So when you look at the labels, if you see the words corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, fructose, maltose, and sucrose, those are all other names for sugar. It's sugar hidden by another name. If you need to get your sugar down, get your weight off, you don't want to be eating it. And by the way, If you can't read the label on a box, if it sounds like a chemistry experiment, why would we be eating that food anyway? So let's take a look at what else we can do. I've already taught Ron that I wanted him to use spices, for example, in a creative way. After I mentioned cinnamon, he told me he really likes it. So I said, let's add cinnamon to the steel-cut oats in the morning. And I also told him to add a couple of halves of walnuts to his steel-cut oats. And if he wanted a serving of fruit in the morning, I recommended adding some blueberries or berries of any type. And I also recommended that he not add any coffee and cream to his regimen. You might say, what's better? I asked Ron to start drinking organic green tea. So we were able to come up with some creative ways to start building good spices into his food. I told him that I wanted him to use garlic and onions as much as he liked. Garlic and onions actually help to bring down blood sugar. So all the green leafy vegetables he wants, with light amounts of olive oil, garlic as we've talked about in the past, and then I even recommended that he use turmeric on top. Why did I recommend turmeric? Because it's anti-inflammatory. When you are diabetic, you are inflamed. Your heart is on fire. So we want to cool that fire down. What else can he do? I recommended something called fenugreek. Now this comes out of Ayurveda medicine from India, and it can be used as a spice, and it's very common in Indian cuisine. I also recommended that he use vinegar, because there are actually properties in vinegar, if he likes it on his salad, that have been shown to lower blood sugar. So we spent a lot of time going over nutrition, because nutrition is key to shifting the diabetes continuum. We can't fix the problem if we keep eating white bread and white rice and white pasta. It just won't work. So what's next? Ron now knows how to eat. Well, at Great Courses, they have a sign that says bottoms up. I like this sign. I find it kind of funny. They don't mean let's go to the bar and have a drink. They mean get your butt off the chair and start to move. Do you know, on average, Americans are spending 6 hours in front of a TV set or in front of the computer? Well, if you want to be at your computer for 6 hours, then I suggest you stand up. And better yet, you can get one of those new desks that actually has a treadmill built in it so you can do your work and be on the treadmill at the same time. Simple exercise like walking burns calories. Exercise builds muscle. Exercise decreases insulin resistance. The cell becomes more sensitive to the insulin and the sugar can move in easier. Exercise decreases blood pressure, it improves cholesterol, and it absolutely improves our sense of well-being. Now, this is one of the jokes I tell my patients. If you won't exercise on your own, you have to get a friend who's willing to exercise with you. And I always tell the ladies, get a good-looking personal trainer. That will get you to the gym. So make a commitment with a friend to start to exercise. You know, I have a treadmill in my garage. What's more boring than that? Walking on a treadmill in your garage. No fun at all. I don't look forward to it. I look forward to taking my dog, my poodle Sam, and walking with him, and he looks forward to it almost as much as I do. So get a friend, get a partner, and hold each other responsible for your exercise. And there'll be many days when you'll say, I don't feel like going, and your friend will say, oh, come on, we're going. And there'll be other days when you'll tell your friend, hey, let's get going. And another fun thing to do is go to a dance class. My heart patients love our dance classes. You know, I forgot that in the 1940s and 50s, that people used to go out every night almost and dance, ballroom dancing. I walked into a Nia class, which is a combination of dance and Tai Chi, and my patients were having a ball. They loved it. They were exercising and they were smiling. That's a great combination. And one of the biggest added benefits of exercise is it helps us to get a good night's sleep. When someone says to me, I have insomnia, I'm watching the clock all night, the first thing I ask is, do you exercise? It's that important. So, where do we start? When someone leaves my office, I give them a little pedometer, a little device to count the number of steps that they take. You can buy a pedometer almost anywhere. They're cheap, they're easy to find. I just give them away because I like when my patients leave, I like to see it on their belt. Your goal is 10,000 steps each day. You may not be ready to start at 10,000 steps. You might say, Dr. G, you're crazy. I don't even do 5 steps. Just get up and get started. And every day you increase it by a few steps. You may not get there on the first day, but I guarantee it, you will definitely get there if you keep going. So, now you have the tools that can prevent and even reverse diabetes. Go ahead, make a commitment. Go clean out that pantry and refrigerator and fill them with good whole foods. Get rid of the high fructose corn syrup, the trans fats, the partially hydrogenated oils, the white stuff. Clean it all out. Go and buy a pedometer and take that first big step. And remember this, you can't get anywhere if you don't start somewhere.